No one ever does live happily ever after, but we leave the children to find that out for themselves. Over the weekend, I finished Wolves of the Calla, which is the fifth book in the Dark Tower series by Stephen King. And this one just has everything a reader of fantasy could want. It has lightsabers, it has a priest killing vampires, and it has a group of women using the most unconventional weapon you're ever going to read in any fantasy book. Wolves of the Calla, guys, is just like a delight to read. At this point, like you guys know by now, I'm totally in love with the Dark Tower. This series, I knew I would like it, but just how much I like it so far has blown me away. Each of these books has been magnificent in their own right, and the way that it's building toward its conclusion, the way that King just laces all of these ideas together with science fiction and horror and fantasy and western and romance and his multiverse all into a singular series that sits at the middle of all of his other works and has all these connections, I think is just like, it's magnum opus level stuff. You know what I mean? Like, this is just, it's the most original fantasy I've ever read. It is some of the most unique fantasy I've ever read. And I just like, there's so much to enjoy about this series and this book. I know that Wolves of the Calla, it seems like, for Dark Tower fans, is on the lower end. And I get why, because this is not my favorite, but I still think it's a really good book, and it's got a lot going for it. But I'll start with the negatives and then move my way towards the positives. First of all, the negatives I think you can attribute to this book is that it's on the slower side for a Dark Tower book. Dark Tower, the first three books are like frantically paced. The Gunslinger, you can read in a single sitting. The Drawing of the Three feels like a coked up adventure, and it kind of is. And then The Wastelands is this like trippy, two stories mashed together, and it's still told at like this super quick pace, especially once you get into the second half. And then even the fourth book, which I think a lot of people are like, oh, that's a bit on the slower side, has this amazing narrative, and it keeps up this intense pressure situation that's going on with Roland and everything that happens in Wizard and Glass. And there's so much that goes on in Wizard and Glass that doesn't feel like a slow book, versus this, where I do think the plot kind of takes a backseat to lay down some groundwork for the future books and the rest of the narrative for the Dark Tower. This is a book that is, you know, according to some, or in some other people's eyes, kind of like a side plot. You know, it doesn't necessarily push the getting towards the Dark Tower for the Cot's Hat as much as previous books have. But I disagree with that premise, because like everything in this book, I think really served the beam, and it served the Dark Tower. I think it served this series, and it was the kind of, it's not the last like hoorah for the Cod's Head. It's not like the final formation, but I think that this was really an essential part of their story and a part of what Stephen King is trying to do with this, because it does a lot. First of all, it adds a new member to the Cod's Head from a former book, Salem's Lot. We get reintroduced to Father Callahan, and we're told about how and what happens to him at the end of Salem's Lot. So we get his entire backstory, which I thought was really good. I really like that part. You know, I can see why other people don't. You know, it does slow down the plot, but I really like that, and I thought it was essential to kind of seeing how these worlds are connected to one another, and just how thin the veil is, and how close we are to almost a multiverse collapse in this series. I thought that was really essential, and it explains a lot of things about King's multiverse, and it really allows for some like theory crafting of his multiverse that was not previously available. I'll just say that. Second of all, the character work here and the way that the contact come together and just talk with one another, I think that this is their strongest as a group. And I really like, how human they are in this book. In previous books, they were struggling with some things and they're kind of forming it. And this feels like the fellowship moment. This feels like, hey, and I'll follow you into Mordor, and this is it. Like this is our chance to make a difference. It's win or lose. We either take the Dark Tower or we don't. And this is kind of their final forming moment. There's also like an entire like C plot line going on here with Susanna. I'm not going to talk about what happens, but like I feel like what's going on with her is really essential. So there's a lot in this book for kind of what I like in fantasy. I feel like the character work here is really great, and it actually allows us some time to like breathe as readers, because if you up to this, it really is a frantic pace. And I feel like you don't get a lot of time, besides maybe in Wizard and Glass, to really get to know these characters. You do start feeling attached to them in previous books, don't get me wrong. I love them from book 2 and on, and I love Roland from The Gunslinger, but man, this feels like the one where you're like, I'm all in on these characters. I'm really all in. And I really like the whole Calla storyline, what the wolves are and how they come to town like every other generation, and what they're doing, and how their plan is affecting the Dark Tower, and all those things I felt were super essential. So I just like, the plot was really good overall. I felt like the character moments were really good. The action set piece at the end is really nice, and it leaves you off on a cliffhanger with one of the characters disappearing, and you're like, whoa, what's going to happen with this? And it just like you're racing against the clock. And then it starts getting like super meta at the end. Like there is some stuff I can't talk about, but King is doing some wacky stuff here. And I guess like if you go into this series thinking it's going to be like one thing and then it ends up being another, I guess I get it, right? I guess if you think that this is just going to be like a fantasy Western, then maybe this book is going to be kind of a open eye moment for you. But for me, man, like I knew that this was going to be a crazy, weird, meta-narrative story, and it finally gets to that point in this book, and it really sets up Song of Susanna to do that even more so. Like it just seems like this book was kind of the final breathing moment for us as readers before the last two books, do what they're gonna do. I imagine there's gonna be some heartbreak coming up. It just seems like that is what Stephen King's setting us ultimately up for. I don't know how this is going to end as a series, but man, I just feel like this was like the final piece he needed to put out there in order to say, hey, I hope you're ready, because from here on out, man, it's game time. Like, I'm not messing around. There is no more side plots or getting lost in the narrative. This is just straight gas to the end. That's what I feel. Maybe I'm wrong, but yeah, just a really great book. Great action, great characters. The story is just as amazing as ever. I do think, like, I can see people being like, oh, it's too long, or it takes too much time telling the backstory. I can see that, but I disagree with those points. So I'm going to give it like an 8.7 out of 10. And honestly, I'm excited for the last two. The Dark Tower has just become one of my all-time favorite series. So yeah, Wolves of the Calla is another great entry.